Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic. Sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. Every episode is unique, inspiring, engaging, and meaningful. Each story is a powerful testimony of the recovery available to all in Alcoholics Anonymous. Today is an encore episode of my interview with Diane G., first recorded in March 2021. Diane got sober in June of 1976. My guest on today's show, Diane G., first met her husband John in AA nearly 45 years ago. As uncommon as that is, what's rarer still is that they stayed together, utilizing the tools of AA to successfully raise their family, launch their careers, and help countless alcoholics along the way. John was one of my closest friends, and I had a front row seat to witness his remarkable ability to integrate AA into every facet of his life, including his marriage to Diane. What was beautiful was to watch John channel Diane's love into everything he did. That love was unshakable, and when John died of liver cancer almost 7 years ago, Diane's AA program carried her through that tragic and difficult time. After he passed, she continued to channel John's love into everything she did. Today, Diane's life reflects the richness of the AA promises in action. She is involved and engaged in helping women in the program, many of whom identify with the abject abuse she experienced growing up. Using every tool laid at her feet by AA and other mental health resources, Diane has dealt with an incredible array of bad times and good times, and she passes on to others the experience, strength, and hope that makes her a cherished friend to many, including yours truly. So, turn your phone to Do Not Disturb and enjoy the next hour with one of my favorite AA sisters, Diane G.
Hi, I'm Diane. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Diane. So good to have you here today, and I appreciate the opportunity to share our common experiences and hear more of your story as a recovering member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to, first of all, say that your late husband, John, was a very, very close friend of mine, and you and I got to know each other over the years as John and I used to go to meetings together, and sometimes we'd go to mixed meetings together, but his legacy is still huge in this AA recovery community. And there's still people who refer to him, and he had little slogans and sayings here and there that kind of entered the lexicon of AA lore. And so it's been really wonderful to be able to reminisce whenever I hear those things in meetings. Today I wanted to focus on you and your sobriety. Now, John would have been coming up on 45 years, I believe, right?
Yes, it's September.
Right. So how long have you been sober, and what's your sobriety date?
It's June 14th, 1976.
June 14th.
So I came in first.
You came in first. Okay, good. So that's you're coming up on 45 years,
Yes,
which is really, really amazing, isn't it?
It's just gone by so quickly.
45 years ago or 44 years ago, did you ever look forward years or decades and imagine what your life was going to be like if you stayed in AA?
Well, I guess I did. And the way I did it was I looked at people who came before me, and I saw what they had, and I tried to align myself with getting to know people who had double digits and figure out what they had that I wanted and how to get it. Sometimes I even ask them.
Did you really?
Yeah.
It's interesting to sit in meetings when you're new in sobriety and look around and listen to people share who've got 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years of sobriety. It seems like almost an insurmountable amount of time, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's almost sometimes I feel sometimes afraid to even tell people because they may have expectations of, oh, and you still have to go to meetings and still have to work the steps after 45.
Yeah. Isn't that something? Sometimes I feel a little self-conscious about that as well. Like telling them how long I've been sober creates a little bit of a barrier, almost as if I at 33 years can't grasp or understand or relate to what they're going through at 6 months or a year. Do you find that too?
Yes, but I think because I try to always remember what it was like, I don't feel distant from them, and I have to somehow make them understand I still remember, and the way I remember is by going to meetings and listening and going, I understand.
Yeah. Do you intentionally seek out younger, newer members to kind of keep that freshness to what it was like early on, keep that component kind of in your mind?
I don't know if I seek it, but I'm so grateful when it happens. I go to a women's meeting. We just got back into the church. Probably it's been like 6 weeks ago.
Oh, great.
And there was a newcomer who had gotten sober, young person, through Zoom meetings. And we all talked about during our Zoom meetings what it might have been like to go to your first AA meeting in Zoom and be a young person and how you do it. And it's been refreshing and wonderful to see this young woman's journey. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's something I've wondered a lot about, and I've asked a number of the guests I've had on the show. We've had about 13 or 14 people on so far, and I try and gain a perspective from them as to what they think it's going to be like for those people who got sober with Zoom coming back to live meetings. What have you noticed about that as you've gone back to the live meetings?
The thing I loved and still love about Zoom is the ability to meet people from all over the country and people who can't come to our meetings anymore because they moved. But being back in the rooms, the energy and the warmth, even though we're not touching each other, we're keeping our distance, it just felt like coming home. And it's a women's meeting that I've done that with. And it just feels very comforting to know that they have been with me through all of this, and we've been together and these meetings. To see them, it's been a blessing. But Zoom was a blessing, or it still is.
Yeah, Zoom was a blessing. And imagine, Diane, 30, 40 years ago, before this kind of technology, when maybe at most you could talk to one person on the phone at a time, what it would have been like to try and keep this whole thing together. It would have been difficult. But I was also reminded by one of my guests that during the Second World War and during other times when people couldn't even connect by phone, they still even connected by letters. So I guess AAs will find a way to do it no matter what. You mentioned women's meetings, and this is a question I've never asked, but I've always been interested because people always ask me when I tell them I go to men's meetings, well, how are men's meetings so much different than mixed meetings? Could I ask you that question? How are women's meetings different than a mixed meeting?
I think for me, in the beginning of my sobriety, they were so important because I had a lot of issues with being manipulative and gamey, as they used to call it, with guys. So it was better for me to be with women who could identify what truly was going on, and for me to learn to be honest about where I was at, what I was working on, what I needed to work on, without the distraction of a cute boy sitting across the room.
So the energy level was different, though the issues may have been the same?
Yeah, the support level, the women in AA, at least the meetings I've enjoyed over the years, have been very supportive women, have not been competitive women trying to get the same guy and none of that stuff. It just women helping women.
Yeah, I get that. That's a pretty important thing. I always tell men that I sponsor that they should be going to at least a couple of men's meetings a week. And of course, that's when John and I would most interact, would be at our men's meetings during the week. It was always a great time to get together. So what was going on 46 years ago or 45 years ago in your life that made you decide that you needed to get some help?
Well, I had finished college and was kind of a lost child and didn't know what I wanted to do. And I had never had a goal, a life goal, other than to get through it. And I didn't have very much self-esteem. And my story was my roommate, Vicky. We lived in these apartments, and some of our neighbor young guys were going to this young people's program called PADAP that based the 12 steps and got permission to use them. And these guys were not flirtatious, we're talking about life and things that I'd never heard young guys talk about and talk about the meaning of life. Even, I could hear them talk about God, but I would be in the room with them, but I just couldn't get it. And I think it was probably, I don't know if it was like 3 or 4 months after being around them that I realized they did not drink, and they had a different attitude about life and respect for the opposite sex, which I just thought was so strange. And they asked me to go to a dance, and because I wouldn't go to a meeting, they said, well, I wanted to see, can you really have fun and be sober? And what is this about? And anyway, so I went to a dance. I don't know what it was, but it was just wonderful. It was a wonderful evening. And so I had to drink that next night because I had to.
Right.
And that's just the way it was. And I got very drunk. And then the next morning, a Monday, I had a car wreck right down the street where my mother kind of was like waving at me as I was sleeping. And I had a car wreck, and a guy hit me. And I went to my first meeting that night.
Wow. Have you been sober since that night?
Been sober since that night.
God, that is amazing. So a big turning point in the form of a car crash for you, huh?
Yes. And also, I think was the example of a big book that these young people were showing me. They were just so nice, and no one was trying to tell me my life sucked, but they were kind of showing me how better their life was than mine by example. And I caught it. I said, I just said, I can't do this anymore. I was the type of drinker that I was drinking. When I drank, I got drunk and I got sick, and ended up in the hospiel more than once with bleeding ulcers. And I had a sister that would cover for me until my parents. I had rode the rides at Astroworld and got really sick.
Oh, boy. So you were going to Astroworld a lot in those days, huh?
Well, I worked there. That was my first job when I was 16. And got introduced to a lot of good parties. And yeah.
I'll bet. Well, so as we're kind of naturally working backwards from when you first went into the program, why don't we rewind a little bit and maybe you can give me a little bit better idea what it was like for you just growing up in your family of origin and what might have led you down whatever path it was to get to alcoholism.
Well, I was the youngest child of 4. I was born premature. I weighed 4 pounds and 4 ounces, and my mom had to leave me at the hospital in the incubator. And my father was nowhere to be found. I never understood, and we never asked why we didn't have a car. But I guess it had something to do with my dad, who was definitely drank and drunk and was very abusive. My main memory was of him beating up my mom in the kitchen and then beating up my brothers, but never touching me and my sister, but me and my sister hiding. And there was always a lot of yelling. But my mother had a moment of clarity, and when I was 5, decided to divorce my father.
I see.
But I didn't know at the time, she already had the second father back in the background, who she took me over to his house to wash his dishes. And I'm like, why are we at this other house? And she was like, it's a secret. There was a lot of secrets.
I'll bet. Yeah.
And so anyway, they ended up getting divorced, and it was very confusing because we were brought up Catholic. And when we went to Catholic school, I was told, because my parents got divorced, that we had to tell everyone he is dead. I'm 6 years old, and I was telling people he is dead, and I'm like, I don't understand, but we had to keep that secret. And
because they got divorced?
Because they got divorced. And so my mother said, just tell him your dad's dead. And we didn't see him much But when we did, my father lived in downtown Houston before it was a cool place to live, in a hotel room above a bar that just had a bed and a burner. And my mother would drop us off there, and we'd have to visit him. And then we'd go visit his parents that lived in the Heights, and they were wonderful German, wonderful people. And but my father, my grandmother would say, he learned how to drink in the Air Force during World War II. And him and one other brother, that's where had the drinking issues. And then my brothers both really got heavy into drugs. And the only time I remember drinking as a little kid was my father, before he left, we were at my cousin's house, and he gave me a sip of his Bloody Mary and just was laughing. And boy, it just was an explosion of everyone yelling and screaming, and I started crying because I didn't know I did anything wrong. And I guess that was like the beginning of the end with the family. A very difficult time for me started because I was 5 and my brother is 8, and he started sexually abusing me. Oh, no. And I never understood why me, and I mean at that time through until I was 15 years old, and basically till he went to Vietnam. And I didn't understand why me, because me and my sister shared a bed. And I didn't know until I finally had the conversation with her when I got sober. And she said he tried it with me, and I fought back, and I knew it was happening to you, but I thought it better you than me. And it was a very selfish thing, and I was too afraid. I mean, she was only 15 months older than me, so she was like 6, and so 6.5. So she just turned a blind eye, and, But my stepdad, I have to say, was a good man, a good father to me and my sister, and tolerated my brothers. And one of the reasons my brother was able to control me and manipulate me was he would threaten me, and he said, "I'll beat up, Pop, the stepdad," and then he did, and put his hand through. There was fists through the walls, and so I decided I didn't have a choice. Wow. And there was one time I pulled a knife on him, and I got cut. I have a scar on my leg, and we got in a knife fight, and I lost.
Oh, gee.
But so I was raised in a very violent family, but I was too afraid to make friends because people were not really. I didn't really think about it, but until I did inventory, that people were not allowed. Girls were not allowed to come to our house because of the reputation of my brothers being kicked out of school and sent to public school. People didn't want to hang around with us. But my sister somehow always managed to be the very popular, sweet, quiet, very smart, very kind, very good. So I would kind of like hide behind her and be with her friends. I didn't know how to make a friend.
So you were, because she was 15 months older, you were still kind of in almost the same peer group. But it sounds like, and I'm so sorry to hear about the trauma that you suffered as a little kid. No child should ever have to go through that.
Yes, and the thing about secrets is when you try to, at some point I tried to tell my mother, and she said it's always the girl's fault. I don't think she knew what I was trying to say. My mother was not a bright person and wasn't, it's not a nice thing to say, but she was kind of a voodoo Catholic where she believed in praying to statues and holy cards, and that's how things get fixed, and throw holy water on you and it'll be better. And don't tell me, I don't want to hear it. And so I don't know, she knew on some level, but when I finally confronted her as an adult in sobriety, she's like, "Why are you telling me this now? You have a husband, you have a great house. I don't want to hear about it." But my stepfather said, "Why didn't you tell me? I would have protected you." So he was always more of an adult.
So that went on for a long time, from the time you were 5 until
15.
15. My goodness.
That's till he got sent to Vietnam. And,
that's horrible.
You know, it was not a nice thing, but I prayed that he would die, you know. The other major thing was when I was 13, I finally was trying to have a friend. Yeah. And my brother raped her. Oh God. And so I couldn't keep the friendship. I couldn't look at her. I felt responsible. She didn't blame me. She did not blame me at all, because she was flirting and felt like it was her fault. It was just, we didn't know. And she was only 13. I just knew he was evil. And, you know, hindsight, it's obvious that he was learning it from somewhere. Some of the things he said and did, I know, I know today there was something broken in him. Someone broke him too. So anyway.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's usually when that kind of behavior comes out, is after that person has learned from somebody else.
Yes. And so me and Pam drank for the first time.
Okay. This was at what, 15 you said?
13. At 13.
Okay.
At 13. Right. After what happened to her, we drank. And we both got drunk. And it was the first time I realized I could I felt disoriented. I didn't know what was happening, and it felt good to not know what was happening.
So Pam was your friend. She was the one that your brother raped. So even after that experience, you and she were able to stay friends?
For a while.
Yeah.
It was almost like we couldn't talk about it. We drank about it. So she was the only person I drank with. My sister caught me drinking once and told me, that's not cool. Don't do that. Right, it's not a good idea. And so I'd spend the night at Pam's house and we would drink to the point of getting drunk.
So you and she were survivors of the same demon in your lives.
And of course, we didn't know that at the time, and we didn't know why we were drinking, but we'd only do it on weekends. I couldn't spend the night or anything. We only did it on weekends. But the other, I guess, major thing that I forgot, I just thought of that when I was 10, when my mother remarried, we had 2 stepsisters and a stepbrother. They did not live with us, and they were older. The girls were older, and the stepbrother was like, I think, between my brother's age, but he was a normal. And he would spend the night, and he also sensed something and kind of was trying to protect me in a sense, but he didn't know it at the time. He just, because I was the little one, he was always really kind to me and kind of like, was there. And then when I was 10, my stepsister got killed in a car wreck. Oh, no. By drunk drivers. The reason why this is important is my mind was stupid, immature, and I swore I'd never drive.
Never drive.
I never drive. I didn't get my driver's license until I was 21, only because people made me. I was terrified of driving. Not terrified of drinking and driving, but terrified of driving.
So you were traumatized by that occurrence to the extent that it made you want to never drive, and the other trauma that you had suffered culminated in starting to drink at 13. Yeah. When you started to drink at 13, what was the feeling that you got from that? Were you able to blot out what had gone on, or what was that experience like?
Yes, it kind of taught me that, especially if it was a weekend and I had enough to drink, and if something happened that evening, I learned to be above myself and not be in my body when it was happening. Because then he started bringing friends over and touching me inappropriately. And so I just was, it was a weird feeling. I felt like I was floating above. That could have been the alcohol, but that's how I learned to tolerate what was happening.
Yeah, disassociation, they call it, I think.
Yes, disassociation. And I couldn't cry. I couldn't cry. Yeah. I just was like, numb.
I once had a psychiatrist tell me that when we explored my childhood, he spoke about disassociation, and the only way to get through the idea of having been beaten And my dad used to say, whenever we cried, I'll stop crying, I'll give you something to really cry about. So for the rest of my life, I always had a very, very difficult time shedding tears about anything. And of course, I had to do a lot of work on that with psychiatrists and psychologists over the years, but it took a long time to get over that.
Yes, it took me too. When I did my very first inventory, I was blessed with a sponsor who started off with the third step prayer. And then I'm going to share with you my deepest, darkest secret. And she shared with me the exact same thing. She was abused by a brother. Wow. I just cried. We both cried. And it was like, I just couldn't talk. I felt God. I felt like love for the first time and that I was going to get through it. She was a sweet sponsor, very loving, and basically told me at some point I probably would need, some type of therapy.
Yeah.
And I did get therapy when my middle daughter was 5. I walked in the room and I saw her and she reminded me of me and I just started bawling.
Yeah.
And I told John that she was always going to be safe and she was going to have a childhood and I didn't have a childhood. And I just broke down. And I was lucky enough to find a therapist that specialized in it and have worked with a lot of women. I have sponsees that were drawn to me and didn't know the situation. And so many of them were victimized by some type of abuse.
Isn't that amazing how you found a sponsor who had the same experience as you had without knowing it ahead of time? If that's not a God deal, I don't know what is.
It was such a miracle blessing. Any other sponsor that I had after that, not that they wouldn't help, but no one ever to this day as a sponsor understood that.
There's a lot to be said for that, where the other person having the same experience in the same way, first of all, makes you feel like you're not alone, but also gives you a sense of hope because if they've gotten through it, then maybe you can get through it. And that's where that shared trauma, that shared pain and everything else can make a big difference. So you were drinking at 13, and then how long did that go on? And that's what, middle school going into high school?
Yes, and it seemed like my progression was very fast. I was committed to trying to be the good girl out of fear because I saw if you're not good, you'll end up like my brothers and, jail and everything else, and it'll upset your parents more than they're already upset, and they don't deserve that. And I really was trying to listen to my sister who kept saying study, and it's like we'd have the same class in high school in Spanish, and she'd study for 5 minutes and I'd study for 35 minutes. And I kind of resented it, but I just finally accepted I had to study harder to get what I wanted compared to her. Sure. And that she was always my cheerleader. Like, you can do it. You can do it. It's even if it takes you, and to this day, she's always been supportive. And she didn't understand why things would happen to me the way they did. But like in high school, I was ridiculed. I was very thin. And there was priests that said things to me like, you're a surfer's dream, a flat board. What priest would say that? A priest said that in front of the whole class.
Yeah.
And there were nuns that would tell me, this person, Margaret, is beautiful and she's popular and you're not so much. But you know what that means? You're going to get a higher place in heaven. So I got all this distorted mean things thrown at me.
Yeah, and isn't it amazing that what that priest said to you doesn't sound shocking these days? I mean, before everything that's been going on in recent years, that sort of thing would have been a shock. But when you said it, it's like, well, of course he said that.
Yeah. And it was almost flirtatious too.
Oh no.
It was almost a mixed message.
Yeah.
High school, I just survived, and I finally, though, made a couple friends.
Oh, good.
Who, one of them is still my friend today. She introduced me to a fun weekend at it was a strange thing, at these people's house that lived in her neighborhood, and the mother was an invalid. And she let everybody come over and smoke pot, drink alcohol, do anything you wanted to do. She loved having young people around.
Huh.
I mean, they do drugs too. I mean,
sure, yeah.
Like acid and besides pot, all kind of stuff. But me and Cece were like, we just drank and flirted with the surfers. We just were, we both wanted to find a boyfriend, and I didn't have the tools to have a relationship. Mm-hmm. I had really bad acne, so I wasn't very attractive to most boys, and I was just their friend.
Yeah. So a neighborhood lady was allowing for this stuff to go on with underage?
Yes. And the police never came. There must have been 30 kids at this house, and maybe more. And then we'd have parties, but I never really connected with anybody until I think it was my senior year, and I ended up liking this. He was kind of nerdy looking, which he was cute. He was a cute nerd. He was kind of a ready to go to college, nice guy. I invited him to my graduation, and for some reason, my father showed up. Wow. And my friends, a handful of girls that I have friends with, I just introduced them like it was nothing. This is my real dad. They're like, what are you talking about, your real dad? And I just thought it was funny. Of course, I had drank before that, so I just thought it was hilarious. And he just made an appearance and left. Yeah. But that evening, we drove downtown. We're all drunk. I don't know why we were driving town. And I saw him stumbling. And I just started bawling. Yeah,
this is your dad you saw stumbling down the street or just...
Yeah, down the street, close to where he lived, somewhere by where he lived. And it hit me of my, family of origin. That is my dad. And I'm a loser. Who would want me? And... it just, I guess that at that point I realized, in a lot of ways I am, depressed.
You're right.
And the thing that saved me in some ways was all the partying, because I didn't know I was depressed. I kept partying, and between the surfer boys and the Astroworld people. Wow. And the Astroworld people really drank more than the surfers who did more drugs. Right. So I was like going between two worlds.
So you moved between the two of them just on a regular basis, working at Astroworld and then hanging out with the surfers? You did both, huh?
Yeah, I was looking for love in the wrong places. Just looking. I just thought he would fall in my lap. And, this one guy did, kind of, but he wanted to have sex, and I just wasn't willing. And so he dumped me. And then there was the guy that had the guitar. Oh, yeah. Who was like... James Taylor, who all the girls were like, and I was like, oh my God. And my sister's like, stay away from him. Yeah, and of course, I wasn't going to. Wow. He was the guy that I chose that I was going to have sex for the first time. Right. The day before my first day of college. I was going to U of H, and I didn't want to be a virgin. Right. And just the only person who had, touched me was my brother. Right. So, and then Ed apparently told me to go home and grow up, because I started crying hysterically after it. I was just, I didn't know. I just, so then there was the college years of drinking, going to class, trying to figure out what I was going to do when I grew up. But if anybody liked me, I wouldn't even give them a chance, because I didn't, especially if they looked normal. Yeah. I had the, student teacher. Right. Who was interested and asked me out, which I'm sure he wasn't supposed to, and asked me over to his apartment, took me to dinner and then to his apartment. And he would have made sense to have a relationship with, because he wasn't trying. He was just trying to be a gentleman the whole time, and just was enjoying talking it. No, I ran.
That's such a tragic irony you're talking about right there, that you wanted the relationship, you wanted the love, and the minute it started coming towards you, you pushed away from it and went right back to the booze and the drugs, I guess, right?
Yeah, and I didn't do any drugs for a long time. I think I smoked pot once in college. I didn't like the way it made me feel.
Oh, okay.
And you got to realize I was not, I had no car. So anything I did, somebody had to take me to and from. So
I get it.
So I had to have really good friends that cared about me so that they would, come and get me if I got stranded on those one night stands.
Yeah.
And there were so many that it was really embarrassing. When I did my inventory, it really was embarrassing. But it was great because I started seeing the pattern. It was the first time when I did an inventory with this great sponsor that she helped me see the pattern. And, I tried to make school a priority, but then it was pretty funny. Ed got married. And, he called me in his office at Astroworld and said, I'm getting married. And I'm like, who to? I was like, what? And he married the sweet, virginal kind of impression girl. And anyway, jump a year later, I started having an affair with him because he wasn't happy.
Oh, my. Okay.
And then he proposed to me while he's drunk and I'm drunk in front of a couple friends while he's still married. Yeah. And I'm entertaining that. And he goes, we're going to move. Let's move to Idaho. And I went, oh, okay. and I remember for some reason talking to a college professor. And she said, don't do it. Yeah. She said, don't do it. Don't do anything for she's a sociology professor. She said, you need to think about your education and your future. And, that can wait kind of thing. And of course, I don't even know if I told her that, of course he was married. But, they were separated at the time.
Right.
But my sister was like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
I love him as a friend, but he is bad news. And no. You stay in school. She was at UT.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So you're still at the University of Houston.
I stayed at U of H because I didn't know how to drive. My mother took me to school.
Right. I get that. Yeah.
And until I got a roommate, Vicky, and then she would take me to school, and that was much cooler.
Did you suffer any of the consequences most people do in college when they're active drinkers? Did you do your schoolwork? Did you get through it? Or did you have problems with the academic part of your college?
The first year I had problems because with Ed and all that. Yeah. And I told my sister I wanted to drop out and she told me, don't do it. Don't do that. Don't go with him and all that. And my grades weren't that good. They were never that good.
Right.
But they weren't bad. I was pretty much a B, C student. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how, but I usually would not go out until 10 o'clock after I did my schoolwork.
I get it, yeah.
It was discos, and I loved to dance. I had to dance.
Sure.
It was important.
Yeah, well, disco days, everybody had to dance, right?
I didn't really have any consequences.
Yeah.
Other than internal.
Yeah,
because I wasn't driving yet, so I couldn't hurt anybody when other than my mouth.
Yeah,
I was mainly hurting myself the whole time, physically and mentally. It was mainly that was my major consequences until I then started following CC through motocross. Then I got interested in motocross.
Motocross,
yes. So the one guy that I liked was number one at the time, and she was really mad because he asked me to go to dinner with him after a race. Okay. And we had just met, and I was supposed to be getting married, and she just said, I thought you were getting married
to Ed.
I went, yeah. And I was like, yeah, who knows? And so Gary was like the all-American non-drinker.
Yeah.
Because he was very committed to what he was doing. And his father, I think, drank too much and had a brother. So anyway, we took time to get to know each other. And I'd go during college, spring break, I'd go to California or Florida, or wherever he was. And we did not get intimate for a year. But I'd have a boyfriend here.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have a boyfriend. It was just all over the place.
Yeah, yeah.
The main reason I'm bringing this up is because I went to meet Gary's family, and it was getting serious, and I thought when I finished college, I'd move to California, become a juvenile probation officer,
right?
And we'd get married. Huh. So I went to meet his family, and his father, I drove with his father, and, met his family. I was drinking so much. I don't know what happened. I still, to this day, I wish I could have, there was only telephone, so he stopped accepting my phone calls, but something happened.
Yeah.
and he would never speak to me again.
Oh, no.
This was 1976.
So that happened in a blackout then, huh?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I was there at his house for a week, with his family, and I don't know what I did.
I guess they noticed something, though. Don't you think so, Diane?
Yeah, I think I might have said or done some really inappropriate things.
No doubt.
Yeah, which, I was not a mean drunk at all. Right. I was a fun entertainer. I could have stripped in front of him. I don't know.
Right.
But
my goodness.
It was over. And my friend Cece was kind of thought, haha, now it's your turn.
Now it's your turn.
She was kind of mad. It still had that little in the back of her head, mad at me. And I'm still mad at her that she didn't ask him what I did when she saw him a few years ago, just so I'd know. But
still mad.
Just kind of wanted to know. But that was a turning point for me. I realized I had another boyfriend here who was a drug addict and stuff. And I told him that Gary was more important, and I'll drop him in a minute. But I realized through the help of friends that I was broken. I was doing some really... some hard drinking, and it was time to grow up.
And this is when you were still living with Vicky?
Yeah, and that's when I started seeing all her friends and how they were acting.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying AA Recovery interviews, I invite you to check out my latest audiobook, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a relaxing yet meaningful and engaging way to listen to the Big Book anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, iTunes, or Amazon. While you're there, search for my other audiobook, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories missing from the third and fourth editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's also available from Amazon as a Kindle book or in paperback if you'd like to read along. You're going to love it. And we're back. This kind of takes us back to what we were talking about in the beginning, where the people in the apartment building were members of this group that you became involved with.
Yes. And it was really good because I had a date one night with a Houston Oiler that a friend got me.
Right.
And when we came home, he expected more, and they walked in on it and got him off of me. And those few incidents in such a short time made me realize it was just a matter of time before I was, putting my life in danger.
So these people kind of reached into what was rapidly becoming a broken life to pull you out. That's what it sounds like.
Yes. And they just always there when something bad was happening those last few months from January through June. They were there just like by example, just by listening and asking me. I remember his name is Pat C. Asked me, "Are you happy with the way things are going?" And I said, well, if I knew where my contacts were and I could see, I don't know, I took them off when I was drunk last night and I can't see a thing.
Yeah.
And he said, do you think that's normal behavior? And, was just kind of like, it was a wonder. He's still obviously a friend of mine today, but he was instrumental in just talking to me as a guy, just saying, you deserve better.
Yeah. Pat's a beautiful man. He's steeped in the program and in AA and in recovery. So this program that you were involved with these folks, it was based upon and working through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yes, except they put the first 2 steps together, and the second step was stick with winners in order to grow, which was a really good thing for a young adult to realize that peers were so important. And in my first few months of sobriety, I just went wherever everyone was going after coffee or ice cream or whatever, because you could only talk to your sponsor at a meeting or on the phone. And there was no cell phones. So everything had to be planned.
I see.
And then at 3 months sobriety, this young man walked in that had an afro and was very attractive. And I said, I'm going to marry him. I don't know why. He was opposite of surfers, but there was something about this guy. And my sponsor said, stay away.
Oh.
And he even told me at a party, stay away from me because I'm going to jail because I got, this heroin case hanging over me. But that just made him more attractive.
Yeah.
But he was such an attractive person and loved the program so much that they asked him to move to Austin to start a young people's program there.
Sure.
And so he did. And so we kind of started dating long distance, and I really liked him. We really talked. We talked about everything. The most important conversation we ever had was at Mount Bonnell when he asked me tell me about your God.
Wow.
And I said, I can't. You tell me first.
Oh.
And he did. And it was the beginning of such a wonderful relationship with God, because I had to throw mine away and start over.
Yeah.
And I've taken my kids there. And so John moved to Austin, and eventually I got a job offer using my degree, sociology, to work at the hospital and do biofeedback and neurotone on the alcohol floor.
I see.
It was unbelievable to be paid for doing something that you love, working with others, listening, helping with psychological testing, sitting in group. It enhanced my sobriety.
I'm sure.
With helping others, as we all know.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's in Austin that you were doing that?
Mm-hmm.
So you and John were both in Austin by that point. This was, how long after you met him, or was this point that you're talking about?
I think he had like 6 months of sobriety when he went.
Right.
But I got sick. They didn't know what was wrong at first, and it was a female thing. And
right.
Anyway, I had a pap smear. They said it was precancerous. So I had to have back a surgery, and the doctor said if it's cancer, we have to do a hysterectomy. Oh, no. And I was only 23, and John was with me and supported me through the surgery, and it was endometriosis. It was not cancer. It did not become cancer. Right. But I was so afraid of that surgery. I asked my sponsor if I should do the surgery without any drugs, because I didn't want to affect my sobriety.
Right.
And she said, no, you have to go.
Yeah.
They cannot cut you from hip bone to hip bone and you not have, it's okay. Right. And we'll just I'll talk with you through it.
Sure.
And my grandmother at that time, I think it was the first time she met John, and she told me to marry him because he took such good care of me when I was sick. Yeah. So I couldn't move right away because I couldn't, I had to be bedbound for a while. But then when I got there, it was just such a wonderful gift. Working there. Yeah. And then PDAP asked us to move back to Houston and work in Houston. And we got married in January 78.
So you guys were sober for about a year and a half or so when you got married. Okay. Both of you were engaged with PDAP to some degree. Yes. Were you also going to a lot of outside AA meetings as well?
We started in Austin. That's when we went to our first AA meetings, when we were both in Austin, because there was no other place for us. We were leading, so we couldn't get our needs met. So we started going, met some wonderful people, just loved it.
How did it compare with the PDAP program, though? From your experience with PDAP versus going to AA for the first time, did you know, were there big differences that you noticed?
The main difference there seemed like there were a lot more men.
Yes.
Than women. That was the main difference, and they seemed a lot more hardcore drinkers. They had drank a lot longer. But they were totally accepting. At least the one we went to, there would be some meetings we went to where they didn't like if you talked about drugs at the same time you talked about alcohol. But my experience was mainly with alcohol. Only one time did I ever do any drugs. Okay. But it was very welcoming, and we liked this one group. And then John and I had moved in together before we got married. And
you were back in Houston after that point. You came back to Houston.
After we got married, we came back. We got married at U of H. John was working. At that time, they asked him to work for PDAP, and he had started working. And then they asked me to. It was probably the best service work I ever did was in the PDAP days, because I had some different experience. I worked with juvenile probation, and got children, young people who might not have otherwise gotten saved. I got to see who was being arrested at juvenile probation, even if they were pyromaniacs. Then I think, well, maybe he's doing drugs. And then I said, can I talk to him? And then I talked to him and get him go before a judge with a social worker and get him probated to the program and try to turn their lives around.
So you guys are newly married, and you became more and more involved in AA as time went on.
Yes.
in the city. In what ways did you and he support each other's program during the first number of years that you were married? Were there times at which he kind of held you up and vice versa?
He probably held me up more than I held him up. He loved meetings. Obviously I finally got over the fear and learned how to drive when I was 21.
Right.
So we didn't have a lot of money, so we only had one car. So we would go to meetings a lot together.
Mm-hmm.
We'd go to, at first, when we first got married, to PDAP meetings and things.
Sure.
And then we'd go to AA meetings. But then when our first daughter was born, they asked us to move. She was a few months old, to move to Waco and start a program there.
Right.
And the AA there was not welcoming to me. The men basically told me that Al-Anon was in the next room.
Really?
And I had never experienced that before.
Just because you were a woman?
Because I was a woman and a young woman. They just didn't get it. But John just said, she's coming in here with me.
Oh, good for him.
Good. Yeah. So they learned to accept me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I learned to enjoy Al-Anon and gain from Al-Anon, learning about a relationship with a man who, even though he's sober, he's an alcoholic. I learned a lot from those women in Waco.
I'll bet you did. So you were involved in Al-Anon early on in your sobriety.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're talking about PDAP, and when I've had other guests on the show who are in the recovery field, because of the anonymity and because of the sixth tradition and the fourth tradition, trying to keep a separation between AA and anything else, to what degree can one talk about, in your mind, about PDAP and AA in the same breath? Is that problematic at all?
I personally don't think it is, but I understand where some people do, because my understanding is when PDAP was started, they got permission from AA to use the steps.
They did, okay.
And make adjustments for it. That's my understanding, that was always done. Mm-hmm. But I think for myself, the growing up came when John and I both ended up in AA on a regular basis. We kind of outgrew it for more than one reason.
Well, it's meant for younger people anyway. So after you got married and you had your first daughter.
Yes, it was just not a healthy environment anymore. And we didn't want people staying with us. We didn't want people, constantly having the door of working the 12-step by having people live with us anymore when a baby came in.
Yeah, I get that.
I pretty much so said, we're moving back to Houston. No, I don't want to work for PDAP anymore. I want us to be grown up, and life events happened, and John's father got very sick, so we had to move back and take over the family business.
Right.
I was grateful to be back in Houston and have a good support system in AA here.
Yeah, and his whole family was here too, right?
Yes. Yeah, at the time, his sister was still here.
Yeah.
And so his mom needed him, and he started enjoying being a real grown-up and have a real job.
Yeah.
But committed to still going to meetings on a regular basis.
And he was a lot of help to a lot of guys in those early years. I've run into men over the years who talk about John in the early years that they knew him, and how he was so consistent throughout the years with regard to his involvement in the program and his willingness to work with other men and do what was ever necessary to make a man feel welcome being in AA. That was a real gift he had.
Yes, and he, obviously to the last meeting he had at our house before he died, he just was committed to the program and then loved going to meetings.
Yeah.
If I can remember him, 3 things that John would say about a meeting is, at birthday meetings, change will always happen. You got to be okay with it. And love is the most powerful thing in the world. And the third is, there's no place I'd rather be than right here, right now.
Yeah.
And that's how he felt at every meeting. And I was there with him most of the time. But it got very hairy for me when I had 2 kids. Mm-hmm. The second one was born with a broken hip, and she had a harness on. It was very hard to manipulate a diaper, and John's big hands couldn't do it.
Just couldn't do it, huh?
So it was very overwhelming, and there was a lot of fear.
Sure.
I mean, I trusted God that she would be able to walk someday, that it would be okay, because the doctors were like, this is good. We discovered it when she's an infant. This will be fine.
Sure.
But it was a little bit scary. And so I found myself, because we only had one car, isolated in the suburbs while John worked and went to meetings. And I kept my program going with a sponsor and with friendships on the phone.
Right.
And reading my daily. And John and I would pray on our knees on a regular basis.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we really did. We had a really supportive relationship. But then we did face a lot of adversities that...
Yeah, I was going to ask a little bit more about that, because I know over the years John related some of them to me. I've never heard about the thin ice periods for you, though, during the many, many years that you were sober. Can you think of some of the major events that happened within your decades of sobriety that may have tried your sobriety or made you question your spirituality?
Well, I think one of the main ones was with David. When my son was born, everything seemed okay.
Yes.
He had some kind of virus or something at the hospital. And then when he was growing, the first few years, he just seemed weird. He was very quiet. His sisters would talk for him. But we just kept saying, well, his sisters talk for him. And he seemed off, but our pediatrician kept saying, he's fine, he's fine. When he was 5 years old, John and I started going to meetings on a regular basis and date nights every week.
Right.
By then, the success was a little better, and we had two cars, and we found out that the babysitter, who was a male, had molested our son.
Oh, no.
And the way we found out is he was somebody that my sister had worked with, and another child had told their parents, who was 9. So when me and John talked to David about it, he said he touched his privates, but then we couldn't get him to open up to anybody, any doctor or anybody else ever again about it. And so he couldn't testify, which was good in some ways.
Yeah.
I felt super guilty, like I should have known. I should have seen the signs.
Yeah.
I should have whatever. And as far as how it affected him, he's only mentioned it, I think, once in his adulthood. I chose not to talk to him about it because there's so many other issues with David. But the main challenge was when he turned 13 and he said he wanted to go away. And we started realizing he was not like other kids. And so we put him in a hospital, and they diagnosed him with Asperger's, form of autism, and depression and anxiety. And unfortunately, we had to start putting him on medications because he started getting violent with me and beating me up, dislocated my shoulder. And this became a wall or a wedge between me and John on how to handle this.
Yeah.
John wanted consequences. I wanted to protect my baby. I didn't want him in jail. I didn't think that would be the right route, to call the police every time he beat me up. We could not find a common, and so we separated physically.
Right.
Both got apartments. We sold our house at that time. Business was tough. Things were happening. John had hepatitis.
Right.
He bit on interferon, so everyone was depressed. Everyone was scared. And so no one wanted to live with David, so we decided the safest thing was for us to live separate. And John was still kind of mad at me about the kids, thinking somehow it was my fault that they weren't as good as they should be. They were kind of selfish and bratty or whatever. We didn't, and anyway, so it drove a wedge. But it took John and I maybe 6 weeks to figure out it had nothing to do with our love for each other.
Sure.
But situations, and we needed some professional help to get us through it. So we were seeing each other, but we were trying to keep David from hurting me. And so we explained to David that he needed to work harder on things. And I started going to different meetings than John, not always the same meetings. And it was very difficult. It was difficult for Jennifer, who was the middle child. And Jessica was, I think, a senior. And she was ready to go to college and wasn't really seeing him be hurting me.
Right. Did you have any support, like a support group or other women who had children with autism or Asperger's that you could relate to, much like you would with somebody in AA, or were you kind of isolated?
I was kind of isolated. What it ended up being, unfortunately for me, was after I went through it, then I've sponsored people who have had the kids with Asperger's.
Sure.
But it seemed like I was one of the first that was going through it. But John and I saw different therapists that helped us with who had strength here and needed to work on this and who needed to work on that to help David get through it. And unfortunately, it seemed like the worst came when John had the cancer.
Yeah.
Because the day we found out John, it was for sure cancer, Jessica calls me at the same time saying she has a miscarriage.
Yeah.
I'm like crying because of the news from John's doctor. At the same time, my daughter lost her second child. And I just didn't know if I could get through it. And then David, who has been working with me, started hearing and feeling somebody beating him up. Oh. So we had to put him in a psych hospital again. And when John came home one time after the surgery with all the incision, David started to punch him, and I blocked the punch and got hit. And he got diagnosed with schizoid affect disorder.
Oh, my
Very
goodness. Similar
to schizophrenia.
That's
and
right.
So now he's on a lot of meds, and it's probably been the biggest difficulty was working with David and getting on the same page and recommitting to our love for each other and making meetings a priority. And working with others is just always, being maximum service to God by working with others always seems to jumpstart us and get us out of worrying about him and learning how to have fun.
Yeah.
John and I dated. We always took time to go out together and be together.
I remember John talking about your date nights, and I remember a number of the things you're talking about. I remember hearing about them whenever I would talk to John, and we would talk on the phone or after a meeting or something, and I remember thinking how difficult that must be. I'm curious, what was your spiritual feeling like at this time that you were going through all these difficulties with David and with the marriage? How did you feel spiritually, and how did you feel about God at that time?
The way I have often dealt with my relationship with God is journaling. Mm-hmm. I write a lot because sometimes I don't know where I'm at with God. And in order to get through a comfortable place, a loving place, and a loving God, is I have to go through writing about my anger and hurt and confusion. Mm-hmm. And I have to accept the fact that every now and then I have to throw away who this God I had going for me for a couple of weeks is not my God. That is just a distorted version. Yeah. And that he's not punishing me. Yeah. And he's not punishing David. He's not punishing John. And that most of the time, as we know, after we get to the other side and things get better, realize my family grew from all the adversity. My girls are better adults because they weren't spoiled with maids picking up after them. Right. And that they learned that we didn't have any money and they had to learn how to do things, that they became better people. And my oldest sometimes would be a little upset that she had to pay for college and pay for her car. Mm-hmm. If it wasn't for the program and our connection, our daughter Jessica would have gotten lost and not found the path to sobriety through the help of young people and AA and so forth. That we're grateful for the support that they've given her. But my relationship with God got very damaged when John died, because I would think, why is my brother still alive and John's not here to save lives? Yeah. And why would the doctor say that he couldn't give John a good liver, and he should give it to somebody else? And I told the doctor, John saved more lives than you have. And I just was so angry. And I realized that a lot of times when I get angry at God today and feel sad about John not being there, John's on my shoulder saying, "You're blessed every day." You know, we had a wonderful life. We had so many gifts, and we have so many friends today that I didn't have and do have and have continued to have, that, you know, despite losing the love of your life, God has, I'm much stronger than I thought I could be. I enjoy this program, and I enjoy going to meetings. I enjoy listening to people. I enjoy the phone calls, and I enjoy making the phone calls. And I can't imagine what my life would be like if I didn't write and get the whatever feeling out. And I think I'm a lot more forgiving of people who make mistakes than I used to be. I'm not as black and white. I realize everybody has so much behind them that I don't judge people. They don't have to work the steps exactly the same way I do, or follow the rules the same way I do to be working a good program.
Yeah. How extraordinary it is that you were able to share not only a marriage and the love and the children and all the other great things with another person of John's character, but to be able to do it within the framework of being involved in AA, with both of you being very involved in AA. I mean, John was amazing. He was one of the few people I've ever known who would always give his first name and last name, and whenever anybody would ask him about that, and I'm not going to use his last name here because I'm trying to maintain the strictest anonymity, but whenever he would say his last name, and I remember asking him about it early on, "Why do you say your last name?" He said, "Because people need to know who I am, and this is who I am." And it was a beautiful, he said, I'm more than just another John in the program, and people need to know that. And
that's sweet. Yeah.
That opened up so many doors for people to approach John because he was so approachable. The love that's still felt for this man all these years later. How many years has he been gone now, Todd?
It's almost 7 years.
7 years. God, it seems like just yesterday.
And I think because of accepting and having him in the back of my mind of relying on the program and think about the blessings and gratitude, that I can't imagine what my life would be like if I didn't go to meetings. That I think, I know what it'd be. I'd be an angry person. Yeah. I would be, and I'm no longer a victim. I understand that bad things happen to good people.
True.
And that working the steps, that I can get through anything, and I don't have to go through it alone, that I have a great sponsor, and I can always be honest with her about anything, even when I'm mad at God and why is he doing this? And she'll say, "Oh my God, I am so sorry to hear that." It's like blah, 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 you know. But sometimes that's embarrassing. I'm like, at this amount of sobriety, shouldn't it all be uphill? But, you know, I've dealt with the same year. I don't know if you know this story, but one of the things that will describe my sister and I's relationship, and John, I think it was the same year John died. Yeah. I was visiting my sister, and she lives by the zoo in a townhome. And we're standing there, and I put my surfboard that I had at her house in my car, and we were talking, and we see these three boys walk up, and we both look at each other, and I thought, I'm not going to judge them. I'm not going to be afraid. And sure enough, one of them puts a gun in my side. And my sister stands back and says, "Get that gun away from her. Your mothers would be ashamed of you. Keep walking. Get away from." And I'm like frozen. And the only thing I know is I'm sitting there with my phone. And all I can think of is all the pictures of me and John in there. And I don't want them to have my phone. So I throw the phone on the floor. So the guy kind of goes across my lap with the gun still in my waist, try to grab the phone, and I just start hitting him. I don't know what we're doing. We're doing all the things that you might not have done. Yeah. But she's still yelling at him. So she doesn't grab him, but somehow he's trying to grab my keys now, and somehow I just they break apart and go flying everywhere, so he starts running. They all start running.
Oh, my goodness.
And we both look at each other, and for some reason I decide I'm going to go get him. So I tear off and leave my sister there. Then I'm going, what the hell am I thinking? So I went around the block, came back, and, by then she had already called the police.
Oh, my.
But the thing that is so funny is that my phone was so precious to me, which I've saved all those pictures because I didn't want to lose these pictures, these memories, and especially his voice.
Oh, yeah.
The one thing that I had on it was this song that he had sang to Jacqueline, I love you this much. I love you this. Yeah. So anyway.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, and I wasn't afraid. I was like, God's going to get us through this. I mean, both of us, I didn't cry about it. I just went, if he shot me, he shot me. But it was like, I'm going to try to defend myself. And the policeman said, I wouldn't advise that, but, you did what you did and you survived. So it's a good day.
What an extraordinary realization, too. And the fact that you just mentioned about the pictures and the voice. Every message that John ever left for me, I still have in my phone. And from time to time, I'll go back and listen to them. And one of the things he always used to say when he left a message was, he used to say, I just wanted to call and tell you a day without Howard is like a day without sunshine. And I thought, God, what a beautiful, beautiful sentiment. Yeah, and he was just that kind of man. And I miss him greatly, as I know a lot of people do. But your willingness to share some of the intimate details of your relationship with him and with AA, and the two of you being such strong influencers on other people's lives. I mean, John sure as heck was. I know you are too. The women who you sponsor and the work that you've done in the program over the years, it shows. It shows. The fact that you've been willing to do this. I don't know who's going to hear this, except that I've done this now. I've done I think the 14th interview I've done, and a lot of these interviews have been done with people with many, many years. You're coming up on 45. I've had some others who've had over 40, but what's really interesting about it is that even with all those years, you still sound as vibrant and enthusiastic about AA as ever. And I wondered, for people who can't imagine why that is, that somebody going on 45 years would still feel like really enthusiastic and real jazzed about AA, what would you say to them? I
guess for me, the main reason is because I just think of AA as a gift every day, because there's nothing that I haven't been through that's made me want to drink. Mm-hmm. And that has to do with the grace of God and this program, because how else could a person survive some of the things that have happened? And why wouldn't you drink if this, that, and the other happened?
Right.
It's this program has given me my life and continues to give me my life. So I can't imagine living. If they told me tomorrow that, here, take this one pill, this vaccination, and you'll never have the desire, I wouldn't take it. I want the meetings. I need the human connection. I learn something every meeting. That's why I have to keep going, because I forget it.
Yeah.
These little things, until people share their stories with me, their details, that I understand what I have to keep doing, and I love it.
Yeah, I get that, and it shows, Diane, and you're such a great embodiment of the gifts of the program, and being able to know you and John for as many years as I have, and getting a chance to reconnect with you now after having not seen you has just been absolutely, absolutely marvelous. And
it's been wonderful.
I really appreciate you doing this. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap up with just regard to AA and your life and anything else?
Well, I still believe that it's important for a person, no matter how much sobriety they have, that they continue to go to meetings, read the big book, talk to their sponsor, and reach out to others and work with others. If any of those elements are gone, you're depriving yourself of the gifts of sobriety. Yeah. And I still enjoy the travels and to go to meetings in other places.
Yeah.
I'm not as good as I was, because it was a lot more fun when John was with me, and I had a lot more courage to walk into that room. But one of the gifts was when one year we went with me and John and Jessica and Ryan, and we all were out of town and went to a meeting together as a family. It was pretty cool. It was very much so a gift. And so I'm really grateful that I live in a house with Jessica and Ryan and my granddaughters, because I like being with people.
Yeah, and sober people. Isn't it wonderful?
Sober people. And so that they can always say, Mom, maybe you need a meeting.
That's when you know that your sobriety and the gifts of that sobriety have infiltrated your family psyche, is when people know that you need a meeting and they suggest it to you. Uh-huh. Well, Diane, this has really been terrific, and I want to thank you so much for doing this. I love you, and you're a beautiful person, and I'm just grateful that you and I have had the chance to connect like this.
Oh, I'm grateful to be here, and I wish you and your family the best.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, my friends, that's a wrap for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed AA Recovery Interviews, will you please tell others how to listen to it? Think of it as a little AA service that spreads the word about this rich and meaningful listening experience. It's yet another helping hand we can all extend to alcoholics everywhere. Of course, you can listen to my entire catalog of interviews in this podcast series by following it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon, and other podcast providers. Or tell your smart speaker, play AA Recovery Interviews podcast. Or visit our website, aarecoveryinterviews.com, where you can listen to every episode of the podcast series. And if you want to contact me directly with any comments or suggestions, simply email me at howard@aarecoveryinterviews.com. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs, and no one receives financial gain from the show. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.